Back in January, when we first reported on the coronavirus, it was relatively new and was contained to China. But now it's spread worldwide, including Italy.
There are more than 105,000 cases on 6 continents. At least 3,500 people have died. Italy has the highest death toll outside China and tonight is imposing massive quarantines on tens of millions of people.
Italy has the 4th highest amount of cases, with the majority coming in the northern region. This made the Italian Serie A the first European league to confront the virus. But now, that's no longer the case. This weekend, PSG's game in France was postponed, and on Monday, the Premier League is meeting to discuss their contingency plans for handling the virus. And on Sunday, there were new developments in Italy. In the morning, the Italian Players Union president, Damiano Tommasi, tweeted that he had written to the country's prime minister, Giuseppe Conte, as well as the heads of the league and the FA, requesting for the league to be suspended. Then, in the first game of the day, Spal versus Parma, players were in the tunnel ready to go onto the pitch when they were called back to their dressing room. It appeared as if the game might not happen. A little over an hour later, Spal would prevail 1-0. But the day was a microcosm of the Italian league in the last month. Today we look back at how Serie A responded to the outbreak and ask, what can other European leagues learn from the league's management of the virus? I'm joined by Nima Tavalli of SempreInter.com and the Serie A Show podcast. Nima, what's happened this past week in Italian football?
The latest on the coronavirus is that it's spread to all of Italy, and all of Italy is more or less shut down. All public events, including sporting events, have been postponed or cancelled, or if they are to take place, they will be taking place behind closed doors, for our purposes at least, when it comes to Calcio and Serie A and Serie B. That's what's happening now in Italy.
So let's go back a little bit. When does this all really start?
You have to go back to the week before the week that we're in now. We're recording this on the 6th of March, on the Friday. Last week, Monday, 24th of February, 25th and 26th, Monday to Wednesday of that week, after the decision was made to postpone games the previous weekend, they had put restrictions in place that were going to expire on Sunday, the 1st of March. So they only put in 2-week restrictions. The Italian government, that is, did it. Put in 2-week restrictions. And so therefore, on Monday, they started talking about what they're going to do on the Sunday, that weekend. And it was widely reported from, and Andrea Agnelli went on the record, even though he's doing his very best to pretend that he didn't, but he went on the record saying that he did not want this game to be played behind closed doors, which the Juventus president and owner. And that is just common sense, because 5 million euros is quite a bit of money that Juventus would have lost in one go. Not many companies can lose 5 million euros like that, because they'd have to reimburse everyone who bought a ticket. So, Juventus wanted at all costs that this game be moved to the Monday, at least on the 2nd of March. That's what they first wanted, so that they could play it they didn't have to reimburse people. On the Thursday, however, there was a meeting where it was decided that the weekend's games were going to be played behind closed doors. The following day, on the Friday, and this is important, the Italian business media outlet Affari Italiani conducted an interview with the president of a consumer advocacy group or a consumer rights group called Codacons, Carlo Rienzi, who said that if Juventus do not reimburse consumers for their tickets, if in the event that the game is postponed or canceled, then we will sue them on behalf of our members, and they would probably win. On the Saturday, out of the blue, the 29th of February, from nowhere, Paolo Dal Pino, the president of the Lega Calcio, who runs the Serie A and the Serie B and the Coppa Italia, issued a statement stating that given the orders from the Italian president and the Italian Giuseppe Conte, basically the Italian government saying a decree that due to public health concerns concerning the spread and contamination of COVID-19, they have decided to postpone Juventus, Inter, Milan, Genoa, Parma, Spal, Sassuolo, Brescia, and Udinese, Fiorentina until Wednesday, May 13th, 2020, and that they were going to move the Italian Cup final from that date to May 20th. Now, this is a lie, because the Italian sports minister, Vincenzo Spadafora, he was on the record saying that the government had told the Lega Calcio that they had two choices, either to suspend the games or postpone them, more correctly, or to play them behind closed doors. The choice was up to them. Now, this statement says that the decree basically forces them to postpone the games. That's at best disingenuous and untrue, and at worst, that's a big fat lie. Because the government never did that. They never said that. They just said that either behind closed doors or postpone it. They chose to postpone it. And then Dal Pino goes out and says that he had the backing of all Serie A clubs. Only he didn't have the back of all Serie A clubs, 9 of which went out publicly saying that they have distorted the league, they have falsified the league, and that they've destroyed all credibility. So the circus was in full swing, and people were fighting publicly. It's been a complete and utter mess.
So what you're saying is kind of this whole circus starts with the Inter-Juve game. But before that, did it look like they were going to play behind closed doors? I mean, we know that Inter Milan even had a game behind closed doors in the Europa League.
This is really fascinating to see a sporting event take place in front of an empty stadium.
Yeah, that's right. Some pretty extraordinary pictures. An important game for international powerhouse Inter Milan. And take a look. Some of their fans unable to see them beat this Bulgarian side 2-1. An empty stadium.
Yeah, they decided on Thursday, as I said, they were going to play all the Serie A games were going to be played. And those affected regions were red zones, as the Italian government called them. Those games were going to be played behind closed doors. But the games played in regions that weren't in red regions, they weren't going to be played behind closed doors, which is in and of itself completely silly. Because this virus has an incubation period of 14 days, and anyone who had been exposed to this virus had already traveled by the time these bans were put in place. And so, by allowing some games not to be played behind closed doors, they were essentially just allowing time for the virus to be spread, which has also happened. They should have done what China did and basically shut it down for a month until they had more information. But as always, they it's Italy in a nutshell.
So they postponed the Juventus-Inter Milan game, which is, of course, the biggest game in Italian football almost every season. What was the reaction to this big game being postponed?
Well, given that it came less with 24 hours to kick off, I mean, it wasn't just that. It was Fiorentina as well. Fiorentina had traveled all the way up to Udine, and they found out, Joe Barone, Fiorentina director, found out on Twitter that the game was postponed. The communication between these people has been absolutely awful. The director of a club should not have to find out on Twitter that the game they're playing is being postponed. So the reaction was, of course, utter anger, rage, because let's not, this isn't and I'm trying to choose my words wisely here. This isn't about who you support and which fan of which team you are. It is a fact that there was an advantage for Juventus, both in terms of financial and sporting games, to not play that game behind closed doors. Anyone understands that. And to move it like they decided to May 13th, when it would have created an absolutely insane congested fixture list for a lot of teams, including Inter and Juventus, as well as changing the dynamic already. I mean, when you move a game a few days here and there, that's one thing. But when you move it an entire 2.5 months, that's a brand new game. You have different suspensions, you have different injury situations, you have different form. It just goes to show that, Juventus are in a little bit of a slump, and you move that big game over to there. The optics of this don't look good. Now, having said that, and I want to make this absolutely clear, Andrea Agnelli pushing to further Juventus' interests is not only normal and natural, it's quite literally his job. His job is to look out for Juventus' best interests, and no one's criticizing him for that. What the criticism is, and myself included in that, is that the person in charge of looking out for the entire Serie A's best interests, not just Inter, not just Juve, not just Milan, but Lecce, Brescia, Spal, etc., is not doing his job. Paolo Dal Pino would not do his job. He failed miserably in his role as in charge of this league and looking out for everyone's interest by, so willy-nilly just moving the game without even talking to the other clubs. They didn't even have a meeting to inform. The decision was communicated on the Thursday, and then 24 hours before kickoff, he just decides that they're not going to play it, and he does it based on a pack of lies. Because, again, the government did not send out a decree banning games to be played altogether. They said you get to choose between playing behind closed doors and playing and postponing the games. I mean, it's just, you couldn't make this up even if you tried.
So, you're not the only one who's a little bit perturbed by the decision. Inter director Beppe Marotta has been very vocal in his displeasure. What has he said?
Well, he completely lost it. This is a very calm man, but he completely went ballistic. And you can understand why, because it just, I mean, he basically went on, in American politics, on Sundays you have the Sunday shows, and politicians go do the whole rounds on every channel and say what they think. Marotta did exactly that on the Sunday. He spoke to everyone who would listen, explaining his disgust and anger. And what he said was, to Sky Sport Italia, he said, for example, that the decision was made a few hours ago by Lega Calcio, which announced the postponement of the 5 games that were meant to be played behind closed doors, and it was made very, very late. Making a decision at the last minute could probably have been avoided. I'm not worried about the future because we don't want to be in the same position next week. The principle is to respect the fans and the public health, but everything other than that could have been dealt with much better than this. And it's kind of hard to disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean, he went on to say that when they proposed moving it to the Monday, which was only one day later, saying, does the league really care, essentially, about the fans? How can we do that? What about the health implications?
Well, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It falls on its own face, this logic that they first try to move it to the Monday from the Sunday, and what, the coronavirus is magically going to disappear in 24 hours? It doesn't make any sense. And it is a random proposal. And also, I mean, what he said was that, first of all, it would have gone against the logic of protecting public health, in fact, assuming the disappearance of the coronavirus. And secondly, the stadium would only be open to Juventus fans with all the consequent controversies without the presence of our fans, which would have resulted in an unacceptable disparity. And the third, because moving Juve-Inter would also have led to the moving of the Coppa Italia semi-final between Juve and Milan to Thursday, and moved it to the same day as Napoli-Inter, which meant that the broadcaster Rai, who owns the rights to the Coppa Italia, would have experienced its scheduling problems, and in turn that would have affected the revenue of the clubs.
Obviously, he's quite upset, but so is Inter's owner, Steven Zhang, who also voiced his frustrations with the league. He called out Paolo Dal Pino in an Instagram post.
In an Instagram post that he later deleted, Zhang called the league's president, Paolo Dal Pino, a clown. Zhang is a talented and successful young businessman, still in his 20s, who became Inter's youngest ever president in 2018. And with offices in both China and Italy, he has seen firsthand how devastating the disease can be.
And you have to understand the reason why he's so angry. He's Chinese. China has been completely devastated by this. It really hits close to home. And he, Steven Zhang is a very calm person. He doesn't make rash statements. He's very publicly very calm. He completely lost it because he felt that, that this was not being taken seriously, and that they didn't care about the health implications, and they didn't care about who gets what advantage, and they just willy-nilly, arbitrarily make these decisions based on who the last person they've spoken on the phone to and their requests.
What have the other clubs said about this? What about Fiorentina, Roma, Udinese, some of their chief executives or directors?
Well, I mean, I think Bologna's CEO said it best after this decision was made and this stupid precedent was set to protect Juventus' financial interests. When he said it, he said that the following week at home, we play Juventus at the Dallara. We refuse to play that game if it's going to be played behind closed doors. And you can completely understand that, because once you set the precedent that one club shouldn't lose money, all of them will demand the same treatment. That's just common sense. And Udinese, they said that it would have penalized them and they were doing everything to prevent playing Fiorentina behind closed doors. They have 15,000 season ticket holders who wanted refunds. You know, you have all these interests that want to prevent this. The problem here is that, again, the clubs working hard to push their agendas is kind of what they are the people doing that, it's kind of their job. What you need to have is a strong person in charge of the entire league who tells them, look, I understand your interest, but my interest is the whole of the league, not just you, but everyone. And no one's going to be happy. This is what we're doing. And not just out of the blue, just move the schedule around. And the most absurd thing of all is that Inter-Sampdoria game that was postponed the week before this is still yet to be scheduled to this day. You know, it's like they're making it up as they go along.
Well, I think the point you're making was best summed up by James Horncastle on Twitter when he said, quote, another day, another game starts to look like it's on, first behind closed doors, then open to the public, and then just like that, it's off again. And he was talking about this past week in the Coppa Italia.
Yeah, it is. It's this lack of clarity and this lack of consistency that goes like a red thread through the entire all of Italian society and Italian politics in general, but also in Italian football as well. Massimo Cellino, the Brescia president, for once, who's a fiery character and can say some really stupid and crazy things, but for once he was the only one saying some really interesting things. He was saying everyone is looking out for their own interests, but if we all care about our own problems, the real problem isn't addressed. So either there is a national problem or we are fooling ourselves. What happened is mortifying. The only solution to limit the damages is to play the 6 suspended games next weekend, postpone the championship by a day following the original calendar and recover it in May, which is what they decided to do. But again, this whole crap show was so avoidable. If there only had been some consistency, and if they only had called an emergency meeting with all clubs where the president of the Lega Calcio was an actual president and a leader in actions and not just by job title, because he's not been a leader and he's not been a president by any stretch of the imagination.
So let's put ourselves in the shoes of President Paolo Dal Pino. Why do you think he made all these decisions that have been derided by everyone?
You know, it becomes speculative. But at the end of the day, I think it's very clear that, I mean, if we just go from based on what we know, it's that a very powerful and rich person and party in Italian football, Andrea Agnelli, backed up by Udinese and Milan and other clubs whose games, who had home games and didn't want to play behind closed doors, they were absolutely adamant that they did not want to lose money, and so they pushed for these games to be postponed rather than being played behind closed doors.
Well, I find it interesting because as this has all been going on, Serie B has actually not had postponed games like Serie A. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, they haven't postponed it because the Serie B has done exactly what the Serie A should have done, made its decisions and stuck by it. And they have been playing behind closed doors in some of those regions. It makes no sense. I mean, that's why so many people on social media have been joking about saying that all Serie B players are immune to the coronavirus, because it's counterfactual to what the league put out themselves, what Dal Pino put out, saying that because of the government decree to stop the spread of the coronavirus, we're postponing these games. Well, why aren't you doing it in those regions in Serie B then?
So is there any chance that the league season doesn't finish?
What's going to happen is that they're going to play the games that were postponed last weekend, this weekend, and the games that were scheduled to be played this weekend, they're moving to a midweek fixture scheduled to be taking place between the 12th and 14th of May, but they are still yet to decide when Inter-Sampdoria is going to be played. I mean, you can't make this up. It's as if they're holding out to see if Inter are knocked out of European competitions, and in order to schedule the game in. This is the League of Italy hoping and praying that one of its clubs get knocked out of European competitions in order to save its own face. This is the absurdity of it.
And just to be clear, how many games will be behind closed doors?
Well, they've decided that for the next 30 days, all games, all public events are either cancelled or if they're to take place, they're being taken place behind closed doors. So until April 1st, this decree expires on April 1st. So for the next 4 weeks, a minimum, I'd say, this is what's happening.
There are obviously a lot of leagues around Europe, we're talking England, Germany, Spain, that might encounter these same exact issues. If you were to speak with one of their presidents or directors about how they could learn from Italy's mistakes, what would you tell them?
What I would tell them is I would do what every other country has done except Italy. I would make a decision based on public health. I would stick to it. And I wouldn't back out and like a yo-yo go back and forth because it doesn't look good. It makes you look like a clown. It completely invalidates every decision and authority you have, and it makes you look like a puppet, and that makes people lose faith and respect for institutions.
You're talking about losing trust.
Yeah, trust. This is what it is. Laws and rules is a game where the currency is trust. And when you misuse that trust, you end up completely destroying the system itself. And that's what's happened here.
Nima Tavalli is an Italian football analyst for SempreInter.com and the Serie A Show podcast. This show is produced by John McKenzie and Hugo Chambray. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend.